Chapter 9. Warning: Germs are deadly. In 1870, a war broke out between France and Germany. Louis, a loyal Frenchman, limped to the induction hall to join the Home Guard. Gently, the military turned him away. "You can do more for France in the laboratory than in any battlefield," they told him. Louis turned his attention to ways of helping heal soldiers injured in the war. There was no shortage of wounded. The war turned into a disaster for France. The French Parliament declared war without taking into account the sorry state of military preparedness in France. Napoleon III took command of the troops. The Prussian army quickly defeated his army and captured him. His defeat plunged the rest of France into a state of chaos. Louis visited the military hospitals. The experience was very difficult for him. He could not look upon an injured soldier without feeling pain himself. When the doctor made an incision, Louis would flinch as if his own flesh had been cut. At an autopsy, the sight of a dead body and the terrible stench made him sick. Despite this, Louis Pasteur spent as much time in the hospitals as he did in his own laboratory. Soldiers suffered many wounds from gunshot and sword. The soldiers, their faces pale and drawn, often survived the battle. Later, they died of gangrene after a doctor treated them. The most desperate cases were those with wounds so horrible the doctors could not save their arms or legs. In those cases, the doctors had to amputate the limbs. Amputations terrified patients. Even the most skilled surgeon lost his patience to the infections that followed. The doctors themselves admitted their inability to treat the wounds of war. One prominent doctor said, "When an amputation seems necessary, think 10 times about it. Too often, when we decide upon an operation, we sign the patient's death warrant." Louis Pasteur urged doctors to pay greater attention to keeping germs out of open wounds. He begged doctors, steam your bandages, boil your surgical instruments, wash your hands before going from patient to patient. "Whatever for?" doctors would ask. "Why do you insist that we take these steps?" "Germs are killers," Louis said. "Such measures will destroy them and prevent infection and disease." Louis Pasteur's germ theory of disease was probably the single most important medical discovery of all time. Yet, because he held no medical degree, the doctors of France snubbed him. "He is not a doctor, and he certainly is not a surgeon," the doctors said. "There is no connection between germs and the diseases of humans." Doctors and medical students didn't bother with cleanliness. Many doctors seemed totally unaware of germs. A doctor would leave the morgue after dissecting a corpse. He would rush to the operating room for surgery. Then he would go straight to a patient's bed. During this time, the doctor neither washed his hands nor changed his blood-stained coat. Some young doctors prided themselves upon their blood-encrusted examination coats. It made them feel more important. Doctors did 13,000 amputations on French soldiers as a result of the war. Of that number, 10,000 died, either on the operating table or later when infection set in. If doctors had followed Louis Pasteur's methods, perhaps 7,000 would have lived. The doctors still blamed infections on the weather, bad air, the wrong food, or overcrowding. "Perhaps the infection is due to a weakness in the patient," they would say. They blamed the infection upon everything, even the patient, rather than believe that they might be the cause. While in the hospitals, Louis Pasteur also investigated septic fever. It was a type of infection also known as childbed fever. Doctors gave it that name because the infection often attacked a mother just after she gave birth to her child. The wife of his assistant, Pierre Duclos, had died of the septic fever. Louis learned that most expectant mothers avoided the Paris maternity hospital whenever possible. Instead, they had their babies at home. Especially trained women, known as midwives, helped with the home births. This puzzled Louis. Why do expectant mothers choose midwives rather than trained doctors? He wondered. He gathered facts about patient care at Paris hospitals. The kind-hearted Louis Pasteur dreaded making the rounds at the maternity ward. The desperate moans of the dying women dismayed him. What he learned explained why the women feared the maternity wards. Far more women die at the hospital than those who stay at home, Louis concluded. What explains this? Marie asked. Louis said, the midwives insist upon clean surroundings. They wash their hands and use fresh bed linen. The doctors, on the other hand, walk from patient to patient without washing after each examination. Then the doctors themselves carry the disease to their patients, Marie said. Louis nodded sadly. Yes. They spread the disease from dead bodies in the morgue to living patients and from one patient to the next. What can you do to save the lives of the helpless women? His wife asked. Louis offered a simple solution. I must convince the doctors to wash their hands before examining patients. Louis knew that he wasn't the first to propose greater cleanliness in the hospital. Oliver Wendell Holmes, a doctor in the United States, had proposed the idea years earlier. So had Philip Semmelweis, a Hungarian who practiced medicine in Vienna. Both men, who were doctors, realized that cleanliness did prevent certain diseases, but they didn't know why. Louis Pasteur knew the reason. Cleanliness prevented the spread of germs. From the blood of a woman suffering from childbed fever, Louis separated the specific microorganism that caused the infection. He learned to grow it outside the body in the laboratory. Louis Pasteur told the director of the Paris hospital, have the doctors wash their hands in soap and water and then rinse in a chlorine solution. This will kill the germs that cause childbed fever. Also, you should replace the bed linens as soon as they become soiled. The doctors resisted Louis Pasteur's changes. Louis Pasteur attended a medical meeting. A doctor talked about childbed fever. He described atmospheric conditions as the cause. Louis Pasteur stood up and interrupted. Forgive me, Louis said impatiently, but the cause of the epidemic is nothing of the kind. It is the doctor and his staff who carry the microorganism from a sick woman to a healthy woman. The doctor at the speaker's stand smiled down on Louis Pasteur. I fear, Monsieur Pasteur, that no one will ever find this hypothetical microorganism of yours. Louis sprang up. He went to the blackboard and drew a picture of the germ. There, that is what it is like. Such blunt statements did nothing to endear Louis to the medical profession. Even his supporters, mostly younger doctors, cautiously invited him to their wards. Often, Louis entered a ward and immediately began to criticize the care the patients received. Louis pointed out bad medical practices. He insisted that bandages should cover the wounds and that the linen should be sterilized in an oven. Look at this, he told a young doctor. The wounds are not properly cleaned with an antiseptic. You must sterilize the bandages. You must treat the patients with clean, germ-free hands. To do otherwise is criminally careless. You are accusing us of murder, the doctors cried. They resented a person without a medical degree scolding them. French doctors dismissed the germ theory of disease. Most doctors didn't own microscopes. When they peered into a microscope for the first time, all germs looked alike to them. To the trained eye of Louis Pasteur, germs became as different as people. He could tell one type from another type at a glance. Louis Pasteur's ability to see small detail became legendary. For instance, after a prayer of blessing for a meal, Louis Pasteur would look at his plate closely. He would polish it with a napkin. He would tilt it to the light to see that he'd wiped away the tiniest speck. Only after it was spotless would he eat from the plate. During the meal, he would take a slice of bread and inspect it with his nearsighted eye. His brow wrinkled in thought. He would separate from the bread bits of foreign matter. He found specks of wood fiber and other odds and ends. He would pull out pieces of thread, parts of insects, and grains of grit. He'd lay these in a neat pile on the tablecloth beside his plate. This became a habit with him. He acted automatically, lost in thought. His assistants would inspect slices of bread from the same loaf. Try as they might, they could never find the offending bits of foreign matter. He can see them without effort, but we can't see them even when we try, his assistants admitted. Louis Pasteur's interest in the infinitely small contrasted with the French doctor's lack of interest. They acted as if the germs weren't there at all. For instance, one day, Louis asked a French surgeon to collect some pus from an abscess on one of the patients. The doctor wore a dark suit covered by a stained apron. Before lancing the abscess, the doctor remembered Louis Pasteur's instructions to sterilize the scalpel. "We shall now sacrifice in the new fashion," the surgeon said. He passed his knife through the flame of an alcohol lamp to kill the germs. After doing this, he then wiped the blade back and forth on his filthy apron. He cut on the patient with the dirty blade. Louis Pasteur drew back in horror. He could not stand by and see ignorant doctors inflict death upon the very patients they had pledged to cure. After it was too late, French physicians learned of the amazing success of Joseph Lister, an English surgeon. For 10 years, Joseph Lister had been carrying out successful surgery. Most doctors washed their hands after a surgical operation. Joseph Lister washed his hands before going into the operating room. Most doctors wore a dirty operating coat with dried blood on it. Joseph Lister wore a clean linen apron. He became the first white-robed doctor. In 1867, Joseph Lister began antiseptic surgery designed to keep germs from entering the patient's wounds. He purified the operating instruments and sponges in a solution of carbolic acid. He took the same precautions with his hands and with the hands of his assistants. Carbolic acid is weak enough not to injure human flesh, but strong enough to kill germs. He destroyed the germs floating in the air by spraying the operating room with a mist of carbolic acid solution. After he finished the surgery, he washed the incision and bandages with carbolic solution. Between 1867 and 1869, 34 of 40 patients survived amputations. This was an unbelievable number. In fact, many doctors didn't believe it. Surgeons who continued to lose most of their patients sneered at him and treated him with sarcasm. The doctors openly resented his successful surgery. For a time, they refused to send nurses to help him in the operating room. Joseph Lister, a Christian, had a gentle nature, an even temper, determined will, and unselfish character. He overlooked the harsh words. "My results speak for themselves," he said. Where did Joseph Lister learn about germs? He freely gave a large share of the credit to Louis Pasteur. 10 years earlier, Joseph Lister read about Louis Pasteur's study of sick wines. If germs could cause wines to go sour, then they might also cause wounds to become infected, Joseph Lister reasoned. He took steps to keep germs from reaching his instruments and the air surrounding the operating table. In February 1874, Joseph Lister wrote to Louis Pasteur. In the letter, the great English surgeon gave Louis Pasteur credit for inspiring his successful surgery. "My dear sir," Joseph Lister wrote, "allow me to take this opportunity to give you my most cordial thanks for having, by your brilliant researches, proved to me the truth of the germ theory. You furnished me with the principle upon which alone the antiseptic system can be carried out. Surgery is greatly indebted to you." Joseph Lister became one of the best-known surgeons in the world. For such a great doctor to give praise to Louis Pasteur meant that others could not ignore the germ theory of disease. The French Academy of Medicine voted upon accepting Louis Pasteur as a member. The Academy elected him, but only by a majority of 1 vote. The members, especially the traditional-minded doctors, did not think much of his work. They opposed him as he announced every new discovery. His enemies said, "Pasteur is a quack. We need no chemist to tell us how to treat patients. He should leave medicine in the hands of those trained to heal." However, medical students and young doctors eagerly attended the lectures of Louis Pasteur. During one of those lectures, Louis trained the bright beam of a lantern across the lecture hall. "Observe the thousands of dancing specks of dust in the path of the ray," he told the doctors. "These specks of dust, and the microorganisms they carry fill the air of this hall. If I had the honor to be a surgeon, I would use only perfectly clean instruments. I would also clean my hands with the greatest care. I would never use linen or bandages or sponges unless they had been heated to a temperature of 130 degrees Celsius to 150 degrees Celsius. This water, this sponge, this linen with which you wash or cover a wound, may deposit germs which have the power of multiplying within the tissue. Patients are in danger from the microbes present over the surface of all objects, particularly in hospitals. With great reluctance, doctors in France came to accept tiny, microscopic life as the cause of certain diseases. During these times, Louis Pasteur faced much controversy and people who sneered at his ideas. However, he remained coolly confident. He prayed often because he was convinced that there are no vain prayers. Because he lived a life of example, Louis seldom spoke of religious matters. However, on one occasion, Louis Pasteur said, "There are two men in each one of us, the scientist and the man of belief who believes he will see his dead children again and lives in that hope." By 1875, people began to suspect that Louis Pasteur might know more about diseases than any doctor, even though he had no medical degree.